The massive space station slowly turned in the darkness of space, its lights twinkling like stars against the giant gas planet below. Galactic Academy Station was the pride of 17 different alien species. Only the smartest beings from across the galaxy got to study here. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the window of his dorm room and watched the swirling clouds of the planet Kepler 442b. 6 months ago, he had been just another college student on Earth. Now he was floating in space, learning alongside aliens he had only seen in movies. His alarm buzzed. Advanced xenobiology class in 10 minutes. Jake grabbed his backpack and walked through the curved hallways of the station. Other students moved around him, but none looked anything like humans. A group of tall, blue-skinned Altarians glided past, their movements so smooth they seemed to float. Near the cafeteria, he saw some Murthok students, their tentacles carefully holding data tablets while they discussed something in their clicking language. The classroom was on deck 12. Jake stepped inside and took his usual seat in the third row. The room looked like any college classroom back on Earth, except the chairs could adjust to fit beings of many different shapes and sizes. "Morning." "Jake," came a voice like tinkling glass. He turned to see Zethera settling into the seat next to him. She was a Vexnari, and her body looked like it was made of living crystal. Different colors flowed through her transparent skin depending on her mood. Right now she glowed a soft blue, which Jake had learned meant she was happy. "Hey Zith," Jake said. "Ready for another exciting lecture about predator evolution?" Across the aisle, Kulon wrapped his tentacles around his chair. The Murthak student's skin was currently a calm green color. Jake had discovered that Murthak skin changed colors like a mood ring, but with a lot more variety. "I find Dr. Velmar's lectures quite educational," Kulon said in his formal way of speaking. "Today we study the apex predators of the Outer Rim worlds." More students filed in. There was Korith, whose people looked like walking trees with too many arms. Behind him came Cisalara, a snake-like being who could unhinge her jaw and had heat-sensing pits along her face. The diversity still amazed Jake, even after months of classes. Dr. Velmar entered the room with her usual grace. She was Altarian, nearly 8 feet tall with silver skin and large black eyes. Her people were known for being peaceful and wise, which made them excellent teachers. "Good morning, class," Dr. Velmar said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "Today we continue our study of evolutionary advantages in predator species." She activated the holographic display at the front of the room. Images of various alien creatures appeared, each more terrifying than the last. "Let us begin with the razor hawks of Vega Prime," she said. A bird-like creature with metal-sharp feathers filled the display. Notice how their feathers evolved to cut through the thick hide of their prey. Jake tried to pay attention, but his mind kept wandering. These alien predators were interesting, but they reminded him of animals from Earth's nature documentaries. Bigger, stranger, sometimes with more teeth or claws, but the basic ideas were the same. Zithara raised one crystalline hand. "Dr. Velmar, what makes a species become an apex predator?" "Excellent question," the professor replied. "Apex predators typically evolve on worlds where they face constant challenges. They must be stronger, faster, or smarter than everything else to survive." The lecture continued for another 20 minutes. Dr. Velmar showed them creatures from dozens of worlds. There were the glass spiders of Xerion, whose webs could slice through metal. The shadow cats of Umbra could become invisible and hunt in complete darkness. The storm bears of Tempest had electricity running through their claws. Jake found himself yawning. Not because the class was boring, but because he had stayed up late video calling his family on Earth. The time difference between the station and his hometown was still confusing. "Now," Dr. Velmar said, "we come to perhaps the most feared predators in known space." The hologram changed to show a creature that made several students gasp. It stood 8 feet tall, covered in dark exoskeleton plates that looked like armor. Its arms ended in claws that dripped with some kind of acid. Its head was insect-like, with mandibles that could probably bite through steel. "The Vorthok of the Outer Rim," Dr. Velmar said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "They are hunters without equal. Their homeworld is so dangerous that only the most perfect killing machines survive to reproduce." Kulon's tentacles coiled tighter around his chair. His skin had turned a worried orange color. "Professor, do they really phase through solid matter?" "Indeed," Dr. Velmar nodded. "Their cellular structure can shift between solid and energy states. Walls, armor, even force fields mean nothing to them. They hunt across dimensions. Zithara's crystal body dimmed to a nervous purple. How does anyone survive an encounter with them? Very few do, the professor admitted. The Galactic Federation has strict quarantine protocols around their space. No ships are allowed near their worlds. Jake looked at the hologram with interest. The Vorthok did look pretty intimidating. It reminded him of the alien from those old horror movies his dad liked to watch. All teeth and claws and attitude. They hunt for sport, Dr. Velmar continued. A Vorthok will track its prey across star systems, taking time to study their fears before the final attack. They consider it an art form. The class was completely silent. Even Korath, whose people were known for their bravery, seemed nervous. His bark-like skin had turned a darker shade of brown. Jake glanced at his watch. Still 15 minutes left in class. He hoped they would wrap up the scary predator talk soon. He had a biochemistry exam later, and his stomach was already rumbling for lunch. Suddenly, the lights in the classroom flickered. Then they changed from normal white to a deep red color that made everything look like a scene from a horror movie. Emergency containment protocol activated, announced the station's computer voice. All students remain in current positions. Do not attempt to leave the classroom. Dr. Velmar's silver face went pale. She moved quickly to her desk and pressed several buttons, but nothing happened. Professor? Zithara's voice was tiny and scared. What's happening? Before Dr. Velmar could answer, the air in the center of the classroom began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The shimmer grew stronger, and then something started to become solid, something big, something with claws and mandibles and armor-like skin, something that looked exactly like the creature they had just been studying. A Vorthok materialized in their classroom, and it was very, very real. The Vorthok stood in the middle of the classroom like a nightmare come to life. Its dark armor plates caught the red emergency lights and threw back twisted reflections. The creature was even bigger than the hologram had shown, taking up space like a living tank. Its head turned slowly, scanning the room with eyes that glowed like hot coals. When it opened its mouth, rows of razor-sharp teeth became visible behind the insect-like mandibles. A low growling sound came from somewhere deep in its chest. The classroom erupted in terror. Tissalara let out a hissing shriek that hurt everyone's ears. Her snake-like body coiled into a tight ball under her desk. Korath's bark skin turned almost black with fear, and his tree-like branches trembled so hard that leaves actually fell to the floor. Kulan's tentacles went wild, thrashing around as his skin flashed through every color Jake had ever seen and several he hadn't. The poor Murthok was so scared he couldn't control his natural camouflage abilities. But it was Zithara who had the worst reaction. Her crystal body began making horrible cracking sounds, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Stress fractures appeared along her arms and face as her entire structure started to come apart from pure terror. No, 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 she whispered, her voice like breaking glass. This can't be real. They can't leave their space. There are quarantine protocols. Dr. Velmar backed against the wall, her silver skin now completely white. Her large black eyes were wider than Jake had ever seen them. She fumbled for her emergency communicator, but her hands were shaking too much to work it properly. The Vorthok took a step forward. Its clawed feet left smoking marks on the floor where the acid from its body touched the metal. The air around it began to smell like burning plastic and something much worse. Greetings, young ones, the creature said. Its voice was like grinding metal mixed with the sound of breaking bones. I am Krexvor, hunter of the 7th clan. You have been chosen for the great harvest. Several students whimpered. Korath tried to make himself smaller, which was impressive for someone who was normally 7 feet tall. Your essences will bring honor to my clan, Krexvor continued, clearly enjoying the fear he was causing. Each species will provide unique biological data. The crystalline one will be particularly interesting. Zithara made a sound like a window shattering. The Vorthok raised one clawed hand, and the air around it began to shimmer again. I have studied your species for many cycles. I know your fears, your weaknesses, your desperate attempts to flee. The hunt begins now. That's when Jake yawned. Not a little polite yawn that you might cover with your hand. A huge jaw-cracking yawn that seemed to go on forever. The kind of yawn that made his eyes water and left him feeling like he needed to stretch. The sound echoed through the silent classroom. Every head turned to look at him. Even the Vorthok stopped talking and stared. Jake was the only person in the room who wasn't pressed against a wall or hiding under a desk. He was still sitting in his chair looking mildly annoyed. "Sorry," Jake said, rubbing his eyes. "I stayed up late last night." "What was that about harvesting?" The Vorthok's glowing eyes fixed on him. HFY tilted his massive head like a confused dog. In thousands of years of hunting across hundreds of worlds, he had never seen a reaction like this. You are not afraid?" the creature asked. Jake looked around the classroom, taking in the cowering students and terrified professor. He looked back at the 8-foot killing machine standing in front of him. "Should I be?" he asked. HFY's mandibles clicked together in confusion. "I am Vorthok. I am death incarnate. I am the hunter that stalks between dimensions. Entire civilizations flee at the mention of my people." "Huh," Jake said. He glanced at his watch and frowned. "Look, I don't want to be rude, but I've got a biochemistry exam in 2 hours and I really need to grab some lunch first. Is this going to take long?" The silence in the room was so complete that Jake could hear the humming of the station's air recyclers. Sithara stared at him with her fractured crystal face. Her voice came out as a broken whisper. "Jake, that's a Vorthok. They're the most dangerous predators in the galaxy." "Yeah, I heard," Jake said. He started gathering his notes and shoving them into his backpack. "Dr. Velmar just spent 20 minutes telling us about them." HFY stepped closer, his claws leaving more acid burns on the floor. "You dare to ignore me, human?" "I'm not ignoring you," Jake said reasonably. "I'm just trying to figure out what you want so we can get this sorted out." "Are you lost? Do you need directions to somewhere?" The Vorthok's eyes flared brighter. This was not how his hunts usually went. His prey was supposed to be screaming by now, not asking if he needed directions. "I want your biological essence," HFY growled. "I want to study your fear before I consume your life force." Jake stood up and slung his backpack over his shoulder. "Well, that's not going to work for me. I've got plans today." He walked toward the door, which meant walking directly toward the Vorthok. Every other person in the room held their breath. "Human," HFY said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You will not leave this room alive." Jake stopped right in front of the creature. He had to look up to meet those glowing eyes, but he didn't seem bothered by the height difference. "Here's the thing," Jake said, his voice staying perfectly calm. "I missed breakfast because I overslept. I've got a test later that I really need to pass. And my little sister is expecting a video call tonight, which means I need to be alive and functional." He paused, looking the Vorthok up and down like he was examining a mildly interesting museum exhibit. "So whatever this whole apex predator thing is that you've got going on," Jake continued, "it's really not working for me right now. Can we maybe reschedule?" The classroom was so quiet that when Kulan's tentacle accidentally knocked a stylus off his desk, everyone jumped except Jake. HFY stared down at this impossible human who was treating the galaxy's most feared hunter like a minor inconvenience. For the first time in his very long life, the Vorthok felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. HFY had hunted across 17 star systems. He had stalked prey through asteroid fields, across the surfaces of dead moons, and through the space between dimensions. He had faced warriors, scientists, diplomats, and cowards, but he had never encountered anything like this human. The creature's massive form shifted as he tried to process what was happening. His prey was supposed to run, fight, or at least show some basic survival instincts. Instead, this Jake Morrison was treating him like a scheduling conflict. "You cannot reschedule death, human," HFY said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I am inevitable. I am the end of all things." Jake tilted his head and looked at the Vorthok with genuine curiosity. "You know, you keep saying that, but you haven't actually explained why you're here. Did someone send you? Are you working for somebody?" "I hunt for the glory of my clan," HFY replied automatically. "Right, but why here?" Jake asked. "Why now? Why a classroom full of students instead of, I don't know, actual dangerous people?" The question seemed to catch the Vorthok off guard. His mandibles clicked together as he searched for an answer that would restore his terrifying reputation. "The Academy Station was chosen because it contains multiple species," he finally said. "Each essence will provide unique data for our clan archives." Jake nodded like this made perfect sense. "So it's like a research project. That's actually kind of cool. But you know, there are easier ways to get biological data, right? Most species would probably just give you samples if you asked nicely." Behind them, Dr. Velmar made a choking sound. The idea of anyone asking the Vorthak nicely for anything was so ridiculous it almost broke her mind. Krexvor's eyes flared brighter. You mock me. I'm really not, Jake said honestly. I'm just trying to understand your process here. It seems like a lot of work to travel between dimensions just to scare college students. The Vorthak decided that enough was enough. This human needed to learn proper fear. He extended his claws to their full length, each one dripping with acid that could dissolve steel. The smell of burning metal filled the air. Behold my weapons, Krexvor growled. These claws have torn through starship hulls. This acid has melted the bones of champions. Jake looked at the claws with interest. Wow, that's actually pretty impressive. Is that a natural acid, or do you produce it somehow? What? The acid, Jake said. Is it like stomach acid that you can control? Or is it more like a chemical reaction? I'm taking biochemistry, and the professor would probably love to hear about this. Krexvor stared at him. In all his centuries of hunting, no one had ever asked about the scientific properties of his weapons. Usually they were too busy screaming. It is produced by specialized glands, he said slowly, not sure why he was answering. That's fascinating, Jake said. And the phasing ability? How does that work at the cellular level? The Vorthak was completely lost now. This was supposed to be a hunt, not a biology lesson. I control the vibrational frequency of my molecular structure, Krexvor said, still not understanding why he was explaining this. Like quantum tunneling? Jake asked excitedly. That's incredible. Do you have to concentrate to do it, or is it automatic? By now, the other students were staring at Jake like he had grown a second head. Zithara's crystal fractures had stopped spreading, but only because she was too shocked to be afraid anymore. Kalan's tentacles had gone completely still, and his skin had turned the pale yellow color that meant total confusion. Even Korith had stopped trembling and was listening to the conversation with amazement. Krexvor tried to get back on track. Enough questions. You will fear me. He released a cloud of pheromones designed to trigger panic in most sentient species. The chemical cocktail had been refined over millions of years of evolution to cause immediate terror responses. Jake sniffed the air and wrinkled his nose. Ugh, what is that smell? Did something die in the ventilation system? He walked over to the classroom's environmental controls and opened a vent to let fresh air in. Sorry, everyone. That should help clear it out. The Vorthak watched in disbelief as his terror pheromones were literally blown away by a desk fan. Those chemicals should have driven you into a panic, Krexvor said weakly. They just smell bad, Jake replied. Like when my roommate back on Earth forgot to take out the trash for 3 weeks. Something was very wrong here. Krexvor had encountered brave species before, but courage was different from this. Brave beings fought back or tried to protect others. They showed fear but overcame it. This human wasn't overcoming fear. He simply didn't seem to understand that he should be afraid. Perhaps you do not comprehend the danger you are in, Krexvor said. Allow me to demonstrate. He turned toward Zithara, raising his claws. The crystal being immediately began fracturing again, her terror so complete that she couldn't even scream. No, Jake said. His voice hadn't gotten louder, but something in his tone made Krexvor stop. The single word carried a weight that the Vorthak had never heard before. You're not going to hurt my classmates, Jake said calmly. You cannot stop me. Human. Jake looked at the 8-foot killing machine for a long moment. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made the other students suddenly realize they had never really looked at Jake before. You know what's funny? Jake said, his voice still perfectly calm. You keep talking about being this incredible hunter, but you picked the easiest targets you could find. A classroom full of students. That's not hunting, that's just bullying. Krexvor's mandibles clicked angrily. I am Vorthak. I am apex predator. Are you though? Jake asked. Because from where I'm standing, you look like a coward who only picks on people who can't fight back. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. You dare question my status as apex predator? I'm questioning whether you understand what that term actually means, Jake said. Where I come from, apex predators don't need to announce themselves. They don't need to make speeches or release scary smells. They just are. Jake took a step closer to the Vorthak. And for the first time since materializing in the classroom, Krexvor took a step back. So here's what's going to happen, Jake said, his voice still calm but carrying something that made everyone in the room pay attention. You're going to leave my classmates alone. You're going to go back to wherever you came from. And you're going to think very carefully about whether you really want to find out what an actual apex predator looks like. The silence that followed was the loudest sound anyone in the room had ever heard. The classroom had become a frozen moment in time. Everyone watched as Jake Morrison, a 20-year-old college student from Earth, stared down the most feared predator in known space. Krexivor's glowing eyes flickered as he processed what had just happened. In all his centuries of hunting, no prey had ever challenged his status. The very idea was impossible. He was Vorthak. He was death incarnate. You think you can threaten me? Krexivor snarled, his voice rising to a roar. I have hunted since before your species learned to make fire. That's nice, Jake said. But I don't think you've ever hunted anything that hunted you back. The Vorthak lunged forward with impossible speed, his acid-dripping claws aimed directly at Jake's chest. The movement was so fast that several students didn't even see it happen. Jake sidestepped. It wasn't a dramatic martial arts move or some impossible superhuman dodge. He just took one step to the left like he was avoiding a puddle on a sidewalk. Krexivor's claws hit the wall behind where Jake had been standing, leaving smoking gouges in the metal. The Vorthak spun around, confused by how he had missed such an easy target. You know what your problem is? Jake asked, brushing an imaginary piece of dust off his sleeve. You're used to hunting prey, but you've never had to deal with a predator. I am the predator, Krexivor shrieked. He attacked again, this time phasing partially through the dimension to approach from an unexpected angle. It was a technique that had never failed him before. Jake wasn't there when the claws arrived. He had moved again, this time to his right, and was now standing beside Kulan's desk. The Murthak's tentacles were coiled so tightly around his chair that Jake was worried he might hurt himself. It's okay, Jake said quietly to Kulan. He's not very good at this. Krexivor's rage was building to dangerous levels. His entire identity was built around being an unstoppable hunter. This human was making him look foolish in front of witnesses. Stand still and face your death, he roared. Why would I do that? Jake asked reasonably. That seems like poor decision-making. The Vorthak decided to abandon single attacks. He began lashing out with both claws while simultaneously releasing more terror pheromones and phasing in and out of the dimension. It was a full assault designed to overwhelm any possible defense. Jake moved through the attacks like he was walking through a light rain. He stepped here, leaned there, ducked once when a claw passed over his head. His movements were economical and precise, never using more energy than necessary. This is impossible, Dr. Velmar whispered. Her voice was so quiet that only Zithara heard her, but it wasn't impossible. As the fight continued, the watching students began to see the pattern. Jake wasn't just randomly dodging. He was reading Krexivor's movements, predicting where the attacks would come from and positioning himself accordingly. More importantly, he was doing something else. Something that none of them had noticed at first. He was making Krexivor angry. Every dodge, every casual comment, every moment that the Vorthak failed to land a blow was making the creature more frustrated, and as Krexivor got angrier, his attacks became wilder and less controlled. You're breathing pretty hard, Jake observed as he avoided another swipe. Maybe you should take a break. Drink some water. Krexivor let out a sound that was part roar and part shriek. He began attacking even faster, his claws moving in a blur of acid and rage. Jake kept dodging, but now he was doing something else. He was moving Krexivor around the room, leading him in a specific pattern. The Vorthak was so focused on trying to hit his target that he didn't notice he was being maneuvered. You know, Jake said conversationally as he ducked under a particularly wild swing. On my planet, we have this saying about fighting angry. Anger makes you stupid, and stupid gets you killed. Krexivor spun around to follow Jake's movement and tripped over a desk chair. The 8-foot apex predator crashed to the floor in a tangle of claws and confusion. His armor plate scraped against the metal flooring with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Jake stood over him, hands in his pockets, looking down with mild interest. The thing is, Jake continued, you're not really a hunter. You're just a bully with fancy abilities. Real hunters don't announce themselves. They don't give speeches. They don't try to scare their prey. Krexivor struggled to get back to his feet, his dignity as damaged as his coordination. Real hunters, Jake said, are patient. They study their target. They wait for the right moment. And when they strike, it's over before the prey even knows it's being hunted. The Vorthak finally managed to stand, but something had changed in his glowing eyes. For the first time there was uncertainty there, and something else. Fear. "You want to know what makes humans different?" Jake asked. "We didn't evolve to be the biggest or the strongest or the fastest. We evolved to be the most persistent. We evolved to never give up." He took a step toward Krexvor, and the Vorthak took a step back. "On Earth we used to hunt by following our prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We'd track animals for days, weeks sometimes, just walking behind them until they couldn't run anymore. We called it persistence hunting. Another step forward, another step back." "The thing about persistence hunting," Jake said, his voice still calm but carrying something that made everyone in the room pay attention, "is that it's not about being stronger than your prey. It's about being willing to never stop. It's about making your prey defeat itself." Krexvor's back hit the wall. He was trapped between Jake and the classroom wall, and for the first time in his very long life, he felt like prey. "So here's what's going to happen," Jake said, stopping just outside of claw range. "You're going to leave. You're going to go back to your clan, and you're going to tell them that Earth is off limits." "You cannot command me," Krexvor said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Jake smiled again, and this time every person in the room felt their skin crawl. "I'm not commanding you," he said. "I'm giving you advice. Because if any of your people come near Earth, we'll hunt them, and when humans hunt something, we don't stop until we catch it." The threat hung in the air like a living thing. "Now get out of my classroom," Jake said quietly. "I have a test to study for." Krexvor stared at Jake for a long moment that seemed to stretch into infinity. The Vorthak's glowing eyes flickered as he processed everything that had happened. This human had not defeated him with superior strength or advanced weapons. Instead, Jake had done something far more terrifying. He had made Krexvor defeat himself. Without another word, the Vorthak began to shimmer. His solid form became translucent, then transparent, then vanished completely. The dimensional hunter had retreated for the first time in his existence. The red emergency lights clicked off, returning the classroom to normal lighting. The containment fields deactivated with a soft hum, but nothing else about the room felt normal anymore. Jake walked back to his desk and sat down, pulling out his notes for the biochemistry exam. He glanced around at his classmates, who were all staring at him like he had grown a second head. "What?" he asked. "Did I miss something?" The silence stretched on for several seconds. Then Zithara spoke, her crystal voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, what are you?" He looked up from his notes, genuinely confused. "What do you mean? I'm human. You guys have known me for 6 months." "No," Dr. Velmar said, her silver skin still pale from shock. "No, we thought we knew you. But humans don't. You can't." She struggled to find words that made sense. Kulan's tentacles had finally relaxed enough for him to speak. "That was a Vorthak," he said slowly. "They are the apex predators of the galaxy. Nothing stands against them and survives." "Well, that's clearly not true," Jake said reasonably. "I'm still here, and so are all of you." Coriath's bark-like skin was slowly returning to its normal brown color. "But how? How did you move like that? How did you know what he was going to do?" Jake shrugged. "I played a lot of sports in high school. Basketball, mostly. You learn to read body language, predict where someone's going to move. It's not that complicated." "Sports," Sislara hissed, her snake-like head weaving back and forth. "You defeated the galaxy's most feared predator with sports." "I didn't defeat him," Jake corrected. "I just annoyed him until he left." "There's a difference." Dr. Velmar activated her holographic display, her hands still shaking slightly. Instead of showing predator species, she pulled up the galactic database entry for humans. "According to our records," she said, "humans are a young species from a small planet in the outer spiral. Classification harmless. Technological level primitive. Threat assessment minimal." She looked at Jake. Then back at the display. "I think our records might be wrong," she said quietly. Jake glanced at the hologram showing Earth. "I mean, we're not that primitive. We have cars and computers and really good pizza. What more do you need?" "Pizza is not typically considered a measure of civilization advancement," Kulan observed. "Then you've clearly never had good pizza," Jake replied. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from the station's communication system. "Attention all students and faculty. Due to an unexpected security incident, all classes are suspended for the remainder of the day." Please report to your designated safe areas for debriefing. Jake packed up his notes and stood. Well, that's convenient. Now I have more time to study for the biochemistry exam. He headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back to his classmates. By the way, he said, let's maybe not mention this to anyone else. I don't want people thinking humans are dangerous or anything. We're really pretty peaceful. He left the classroom, leaving behind a group of beings who were questioning everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. Dr. Velmar was the first to break the silence. I need to update our database, she said slowly. All of our databases. Over the next few hours, word of what had happened spread throughout the station. Not the full story. Jake had asked them to keep it quiet, and somehow that request carried more weight than any official order could have. But whispers began to circulate. Hushed conversations in hallways. Nervous glances whenever Jake passed by. The human who had faced down a Vorthok and lived. The human who had yawned at death. Incarnate. The human who had treated the galaxy's most feared predator like a minor. Inconvenience. That evening, Jake was in his dorm room, video calling his family on Earth. His little sister Emma appeared on the screen, wearing her soccer uniform and grinning. Hey, Jake. How was school today? Pretty normal, Jake said. Had an interesting lecture about predator species. Oh, and some big guy tried to pick a fight, but he backed down when I told him to leave. Sounds like high school, Emma laughed. Bullies are the same everywhere, I guess. Yeah, Jake agreed. Pretty much. Behind the scenes, emergency communications were being sent across the galaxy. Diplomatic channels that had been silent for decades suddenly came alive with urgent messages. The Altarian High. Council called an emergency. Session to discuss potential reassessment of human diplomatic status, the Murthak Science. Directorate began a crash program to study every piece of data they had about Earth and its inhabitants. The Vexenari Crystal Collective started updating their threat assessment protocols for the first time in 3 centuries. And in the Outer Rim territories, a Vorthok hunter named Krexivor arrived at his clan's stronghold with a message that would change everything. Mark the human homeworld as forbidden territory. They are not prey, they are something else entirely. But Jake Morrison, the human who had rewritten galactic understanding with a yawn and a few simple words, was oblivious to all of this. He was focused on his biochemistry textbook, occasionally looking up to answer his sister's questions about life in space. The other students seem really nice, he told her. A little jumpy sometimes, but I think we're becoming good friends. 3 star systems away, Zithara was having stress fractures repaired while she tried to explain to her family why she would never look at a human the same way again. They're not what they seem, she kept repeating. They're not what any of us thought they were. Jake closed his textbook and smiled at his sister through the video screen. Tomorrow he had a biochemistry exam and he wanted to do well. After that, maybe he'd grab lunch with his classmates, assuming they weren't too scared to sit with him. He still didn't understand why everyone had gotten so worked up about one angry alien. Sure, the guy had been big and had some sharp claws, but he'd clearly been all talk, just another bully who backed down when someone stood up to him. Nothing special about that at all. The galaxy, however, was beginning to realize that nothing special might be the most terrifying thing about humans. They were apex predators who didn't even know they were apex predators, and that made them the most dangerous species in known space.